tuned to Kenneth Zenith Cablevision. Thank you for watching. It's time for talk. Each evening at this time, Monday through Friday, Rosemary interviews local personalities and others who bring items of interest to this community. Time for Talk is a community betterment service designed to cooperate with our local community betterment program. And now, it's time for Talk.
We have as our very special guest again tonight, Bob Talbert, who is a real estate developer by trade, but I think his first love is really the Civil War. Bob's read everything he can get his hands on, has to walk around stacks of books in his house. But Bob, good to welcome you back to our studio.
Thank you.
You told me that the Civil War was the last of the wars between gentlemen. Why such a statement?
Well, it was the last of the wars between gentlemen, and yet the first of the modern wars. When this war occurred, weapons had changed, but they were still trying to fight with yesterday's tactics. They had a rifle that would fire accurately 500, 600, 700 yards in the hands of a good average marksman, and they were dictating their tactics based upon the old muskets, who, if you could hit anything at 100 yards, was a miracle. They didn't really quite understand that they had firepower. The artillery's efficiency had increased and became rather deadly at fairly close quarters, whereas in the past it had become, it had been an arm that when you fired it, it might or it might not sort of hit something. And they had weapons in their hands they didn't really know how to use. The gentlemanly aspect of it was the fact that the commanding generals on either side always had great respect for the others at the beginning of the war. And if they had a big battle and one of the generals was killed and his body was captured by the enemy, they quite often would put out a flag of truce, sort of stop the fighting, send his body back across the line so it could be returned to home and kinfolk, you know.
So they really did the decent thing.
Oh,
well,
yeah.
They all knew each other, more or less, didn't they, oftentimes?
That's right. They knew each other, and all their writings to one another back and forth during the battles, complaining about this or that or the other, they actually complained to the other general about the way he was conducting his war. And they were always using the term, the usages of modern war and so forth, you know. And they held dear the concept that civilians and so forth were not to be molested. The armies were doing the fighting. Of course, unfortunately, it was a war between brothers, and it didn't quite turn out that way.
Okay.
At the latter part of the war, they weren't so sticky about those things.
All right. You mentioned something that was interesting to me about the number of unidentified people.
Oh, yeah. Walk into one of the national cemeteries that was created for the burial of Civil War dead, and look across there where the Civil War soldiers are buried, and I'd say 9 out of 10 of the markers unidentified. Unidentified.
Okay, no dog tags.
No dog tags, no identification. If a man was killed, he was just killed. He was a body out there. And because most battles ordinarily tended to take place, not all of them, but a good many of them took place in warmer weather, it became pressing immediately to dispose of the dead in a sanitary manner. So they just buried them. The boys would go into action quite often with a big piece of paper on their back, pinned to the back of their blouse. Say on there, "Please notify my mama in Steubenville, Ohio," and give her name and address. That was all the identification they had. Naturally, when the burial details turned up, if it was a Union soldier from Steubenville, Ohio, the Southerners had won the field and were burying the bodies. No way they could notify Steubenville, Ohio, and so Mama just sat at home wondering what had happened. Always wonder what had happened, unless one of the men in the unit knew exactly what had happened, and those men quite often would make a big point of going out of the way to write and tell them, or after the war, go by and tell them what had happened.
So there were a lot of people who never knew whatever happened.
Many, many families, north and south, never knew what happened to the boys. They just disappeared.
All right. Now, we talked tonight in terms of explaining to our viewers who might be interested some places close to Kennett, within lunch packing distance, say, or 50 miles, if there's anything that close. What would you recommend they see if they're interested in Civil War history?
All right. Let us assume, first, put a pin on Kennett and take a string for 200 miles and just draw a circle.
Okay.
That's pretty, 200 miles as a crow flies, pretty good drive, and that crow isn't on a 4-lane highway in thick traffic. But That would take in Nashville, Murfreesboro, which is Stones River. It would take in Franklin, Tennessee, but more importantly, it would take in Shiloh, Tennessee easily for a one-day drive.
Oh yeah, Shiloh's great. I would recommend Shiloh.
Fort Pillow, Tennessee, some 25, 30 miles south of Dyersburg, which is easy to get to. It would take in Chalk Bluffs right up here in our own county. It would take in New Madrid and Island number 10. You need to cross the river to be able to view Island number 10 very good. Island number 10, of course, washed away some 10 or 15 years after the war, but the emplacements in trenches to back it up on the Tennessee side, some of it can still be seen, and more importantly, there are people in Dyersburg who can point it all out to you. New Madrid, of course, old New Madrid's gone, but you can see the terrain they came over from the land side on the Missouri side. Then, last but not least, in a way, my favorite, has always been Pilot Knob up here at Arcadia.
And that's not
Arcadia Valley, Pilot Knob, Ironton. And that's not that far. Go up to Fredericktown and out. That's one way.
All right, now that's one. Was there a major battle at Pilot Knob?
Yes, there was a vicious battle there. And in 1864, Major General Sterling Price, who committed his share of blunders before this, and again there, decided to mount a campaign into Missouri to sag up the fading fortunes of the Confederacy in the West, thinking that if he could capture St. Louis, that would really kick them in the stomach, so to speak, and it would have. So they all gathered together over here at Pocahontas, Arkansas, and from there launched their movement. Went up into Missouri in 3 columns.
They were eventually headed for St. Louis.
They were headed for St. Louis.
They start at Pocahontas and go through Pilot Knob.
Yeah, that's right. And one column on the right, under Marmaduke, I believe, or Fagan, arrived at Fredericktown. Another one was further west, and the center column came up toward Ironton, and it began to counter resistance, actually as close as Doniphan, as close into Pocahontas as Doniphan. It's rather interesting to read about that and the gradual building up resistance till they arrived at Arcadia Valley. Price decided that there was a fort, an emplacement there, a fort. It's still there. Fortifications are, been well preserved, and you can view it. Sits out on a plain just barely north of the town of Ironton. And coming up through that valley, he decided he just couldn't go off and leave that in his rear. He'd have been better off to have bypassed it and moved on to St. Louis, which was unprepared. He could have captured it, but instead he got hung up there. He called in his 2 outlying columns, his 2 flanking columns to help him, and they mounted an attack on Fort Davidson was the name of it, and they mounted an attack there. Brigadier General Ewing of Order Number 11 fame in Missouri was in command there. He had a very, very small force, but he put them out in a wing from the fort, dug them in, dug in his heels and fought. Price attacked that thing 4 times, 3 direct frontal assaults. His casualties there, percentage, not number, percentage-wise, were worse than Gettysburg. He lost out of a very small force something like 800 men right there on that plain. And when you drive up there today at Ironton, you look out across that beautiful valley and see that fort just ahead of you there, it's almost impossible to believe that someone would have attacked that thing in the daylight, frontal assault. Just dig in and get them, boys.
And he lost
800 and some odd men right there dead. And the Federals lost something like 8 or 10. That night, Ewing pulled out of the fort, blew up the magazine, the hole still visible, and began to pull back north, back toward the railroad, headed out toward the area of Rolla, and they followed him very slowly and never were able to do it. Price went on from there, went up toward Jeff City. At that point, he was getting such a beating, he began to bend west toward Kansas City. Then he began to have some sense percolate through his head and tried to get out of Missouri to the south. His army was just completely torn all to pieces, and he arrived in Arkansas barefooted, hungry, and lost most of his arms and a good deal of his men. But the fight at Pilot Knob was vicious, very vicious. And they called it the Battle of Pilot Knob. I always thought of it as Ironton because that's the county seat town of Iron County. When I was a little old kid, they had a beautiful iron fence around the old courthouse, and the natives there, I don't know how true it was, used to say that they had picked up metal and the abandoned cannon and stuff from the battlefield there after the war, melted it down and made the fence. Now, how true it is, I don't know.
Is there any sort of museum there in the town or in the area?
No, not that I know of, but there's no one in town that can't tell you exactly what happened. Now, at the library, they have a book, Battle of Pilot Knob, in detail as to what happened there, and preceding and afterward. I mean, you know, in great depth, and you could read that, give a pretty good reading, pack yourself a picnic lunch, go up there some Sunday. It's a beautiful place to go in late spring.
It is. The country's
beautiful
really
country, and it's easy to get to.
All right, another one that I think all scout troops used to go up to and hike around Chalk Bluffs. What took place there? What about that? Was that a major site?
No, you know, by battle standards, it was probably a skirmish. It was of importance. But earlier in the war, Major General Marmaduke, who was a native of Missouri, had decided to invade Missouri to raise support and troops and recruit and all this sort of thing, and also give the Southerners in Missouri, who were sympathetic to the Southern cause, literally show the flag, give them a little moral support and so on, and maybe have them rise up and help them, and they hoped to regain Missouri for the Union. But at any rate, why, he invaded and came up into Missouri, and by the time he got up into the Fredericktown area, he too was coming in columns, and one of his columns had veered off, and for some reason he was never able to fathom, I gather, decided to attack Cape Girardeau, bit off more than they could chew, and got whipped pretty bad. He had to abandon his campaign, go over there and rescue them, extricate them from a bad position, bring them back toward Bloomfield, and had a pretty good brisk little fight at Bloomfield, and the natives there can tell you where it took place. And then from Bloomfield, he began to gather them in and try to retreat. And by the time he came down the old military road down the ridge, known up at Camel as a red, white, and blue road, Chalk Bluff Road, military road, or whatever, and went out where the Nettles place is now, where the old Chalk Bluff ferry was, and was attempting to get across it, found the river in flood stage and was in a heck of a shape, and they flung an old pontoon sort of a bridge made out of local timbers, took everybody's houses and barns and stuff down to make it with. They didn't have time to cut it up.
Did they really?
Lord, yeah, they just went out there and dismantled the guy's house, you know, used the logs and timbers. And the bridge was about half a foot underwater, and they were moving the wagons and artillery and stuff across it, moving the men across it as much as they could. They said after the, after the battle, that the river became choked down there a little bit from the bodies of horses that had drowned and so forth. But they finally made it across the river with the Federals snapping at their heels. The Federals pulled up at Old 4 Mile and decided to stop and have a fish fry for the night and eat and refresh, because nobody could get across this river. When they began to move out about daylight and encountered Marmaduke's rear guard, they were just coming out of the trenches that are still visible up there. They'd set out these trenches some 3 or 4 miles from the ferry to hold them up. And they were just pulling out of the trenches and moving back toward the river. Of course, the rear guard got a pretty awful pepper in there trying to get across that river. Colonel Joseph Shelby, J.O. Shelby, of Missouri cavalry fame, considered one of the better cavalry leaders in the West, was in that effort. And they crowded him so hard he finally rode his horse into the stream and swam it across, almost drowned.
All right, now, there's a story somehow in that Chalk Bluffs thing about a young boy.
Oh, the little boy that was hung. Yeah, that occurred somewhat later during the war, when the guerrillas and the bushwhackers and everybody that was involved peripherally in the war for their own profit and benefit came through.
Okay.
They took the little boy out and strung him up. I don't think they meant to hang him, actually. They just got a little enthusiastic. They were wanting him to tell where his father had gone with the livestock.
Okay, all right. So
they just didn't give him enough air, and they almost, well, they didn't almost, they hung him.
All right. Bob, I don't know where this 15 minutes went, but we've talked tonight a little bit about a few places that are close to Kennett that you might pack a lunch, go see something. Chalk Bluffs is really near.
Really close.
And there are a lot of these other areas that are close by, a lot of books in the library that people might check out if they want to read about these places. The Battle of Pilot Knob, you say, is in the library?
In the library.
All right. We're going to talk about some specific things about Missouri's history that happened during the Civil War on this next one. If you're interested in the Civil War and the part that Missouri played in it, and specifically the part right down here, Bob's going to tell us a little bit.
You have been watching Time for Talk. Time for Talk is a community betterment service designed to cooperate with our local community betterment program.